Yes, I can hear you, Joshua. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, all good. Excited for this. Fantastic event. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you for and everyone else for taking the time to watch it, and again, present. We've got over 300 people, watching this now live across Facebook and YouTube. So yeah, thank you for everyone taking the time, and again for donating to the NHS. It's all for a great cause, and everyone's learning at the same time, which is really fantastic.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Perfect. So have you got some slides to share?
Yes, yes. Let me share my screen, and we've got about an hour, so.
Yeah, what we'll do is, I know you mentioned that you've got a couple of books. You've very kindly to donate those just to try and raise as much money as possible for the NHS. So is it 3 books you've got at the moment?
Yeah, I've got them here. So there's a copy of SSAS Pensions. There's a copy of Commercial to Residential Conversions, and also Advice for Your Younger Self, which is a collaboration of 49 independent chapter authors. So yeah, excited to donate and raise even more money for the NHS.
Yeah, that's great to receive. What we're going to do for these, so for all the donations that come through during your 1 hour slot, at the end, we'll answer any questions. We'll pick a number. We'll look at all the donations that have come through. We'll pick a number, assign each individual donation a number, and then those guys will win a copy of each of those books. So 3 books up for grabs. So get your donations in, even if it's £1 or hopefully a little bit more than that. As much as possible, get the donations in, and then get a copy of these books.
Brilliant.
But what I'll do now is I'm just going to turn off my screen and mute my mic just so we get the best possible connection.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Joshua. Appreciate it. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Some of you may know me. My name's Mark Stokes. I'm a developer with Equa Group. We also run the Equa Academy, and also founder of SSAS Alliance. So delighted to be involved with the property conference and support our fantastic NHS. But the NHS are just giving absolutely everything, and I'm going to give you absolutely everything I can possibly cram in for the next 60 minutes. The NHS supported me as I was developing into a young man. I was at the Hillsborough disaster, and I saw at first hand what a fantastic support they gave to everybody on that very sad day. But look, this is a really positive event in a global crisis. So let's move forward and talk about SSAS pensions and property and unlocking the potential as I have done. Okay, I want to show you a picture of my pension. This is some of my pension. It's not what you traditionally would expect. Most people, and for 26 years, my pension to me was 5 minutes, 10 minutes review of a pension statement that arrived around about Christmas each year, and it looked pretty shabby. And maybe my pension management strategy was, okay, well, hopefully it'll be better next year. And that genuinely was my pension strategy for the best part of 25 years. But something changed, and I'll talk about that in the presentation. And you can see here a variety of commercial properties, and that sits within our SSAS pension, our small self-administered pension scheme. It creates huge amount of equity, it creates huge amount of cash flow, and it's incredibly engaging. And I'm going to explain to you over the course of the next hour how you can engage with a SSAS, whether you've got a SSAS, whether you want a SSAS, or whether you'll never have a SSAS. Any property developer needs to understand about SSAS. They're an incredible source of funding. So what is a SSAS? Well, a SSAS is a small self-administered pension scheme. It has a sponsoring employer, which is normally a limited company, but it could be an LLP, and can have between 1 and 11 trustees. It also has a professional team. And I like to discuss the CALIBRE model, and I'll come back to this a little bit later on. There's so many things you can do, and I know other presenters have talked about SSAS pensions. I'm going to make this very specific about property. So within a small self-administered pension scheme, you can collaborate, you can acquire many things, including property, you can loan, you can invest, you can borrow. And to me, what's really important, I have 4 children, and to me, I needed my pension to resonate. My pension isn't there necessarily for me in my personal circumstances to live on in later life. It's more a curating and nurturing that legacy for future generations, and also treating it as a training ground, actually, for the future trustees of our SSAS pension, which will be my children and my fellow trustees' children as well. And finally, the E in CALIBRE is also to educate. To give you an idea, our holding company, our limited holding company, has all of our 4 children and my fellow business partner, Nigel Green, his 4 children. So 8 of our combined children are shareholders. And you can be a shareholder. You only need a pulse to be a shareholder. And all of our 8 children are shareholders. So my Emily, she's 9 years old. She doesn't really know what it is to be a shareholder, if I'm honest. But the point here is building something, building a juggernaut, a multi-generational legacy, where Emily, by the time she's 18, she'll know more about being a shareholder than ever I did when I was 18. So it's about that, getting those wheels of compounding moving early. So that's a SSAS pension scheme structure. And as Joshua mentioned in the book, grab a copy of the SSAS pension book, and I cover that in a lot of detail there. But what if you haven't got a SSAS pension? Well, as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter if you haven't got a SSAS pension. If you're interested in understanding whether a SSAS pension is right for you, and it's certainly not right for everybody, but also, even if a SSAS is never right for you, it could be something you could collaborate with a SSAS trustee, because what a SSAS trustee is an investor. And most parties in property and in business are looking to raise funds at some stage of their organisation's history and future strategy. So look, we all wear 2 hats. Even SSAS trustees. I don't know a full-time SSAS trustee. Don't know one. You know, a SSAS trustee, nobody wants a full-time job managing their pensions. It's just part of what they do. And if you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, a SSAS trustee's shoes, and understand what they're going through, what their focus is, and also the other element that takes up the rest of their working day and working lives, you'll understand and resonate with a huge amount of very interesting people. You can collaborate with a SSAS. So this is an example of a collaboration. This is Zurich House in Crawley. This was acquired for around about £4 million. It's a 10 to 11 million GDV development that we're doing. And we raised a significant amount of private capital, you know, around about £2.5 million of private capital to sit alongside first charge senior debt. It gives you an idea of that huge elemental proportion that SSAS can have, massive influence. And there are 33 investors on that scheme, and that's going very well. So you can see the repurposing, that regeneration of tired old assets into just wonderful living. We dragged out 1,500 hypodermic needles out of that building as we cleansed the building. So we're adding a huge amount of value to the neighbourhood. And we often find with our investors, they're not just looking for an economic return. They absolutely are looking for an economic return, but they're looking for something else as well. So the collaboration with a SSAS is possibly something you may be interested as well. And that's what I do. I help people, I connect people and help them understand how the power of SSAS can be brought to bear for their personal economy and also for their businesses. So why a SSAS? Well, from a business perspective, a SSAS can invest in companies, it can create loan backs, it can protect profits, you can have up to £500,000 of tax relief in your SSAS, you can acquire your own business premises, there's no capital gains, it's a highly tax efficient structure. You can acquire commercial property, you can invest in a whole plethora of opportunities out there. You know, if gold bullion's your thing, stocks, shares, it doesn't have to be property. it's almost as wide as you would like to make it. There are some rules, there are some tram lines, and as long as you know those rules, then you'll be able to operate free of any penalties. And from your own personal perspective as well, you've got your lifetime allowances. How are you optimizing your lifetime allowances? Now in 2020, they're up to a million, just over 1,073,000. It's IHT protected. My business partner, very sadly, 4 years ago, Peter Abbott, passed away just as his funds were being transferred into our SSAS. And sadly, Peter didn't live to see that. He passed away through a heart attack at the age of 53. Now, his wife received 50% of her pension. It was not protected, and I suspect if many of you look at your traditional pensions, stakeholder, final salary pension schemes, which are not just for you in your retirement, but you have that mindset that they're also for your family. Well, what if you don't survive to see that? So that's the first bit of advice, top tip. Get hold of your pension provider and ask them the tough questions in the good times. What happens if I die? What happens to my funds? So as you can see, many tax efficient routes there. And as Winston Churchill said, we contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle. Look, we need to be tax efficient. Somebody once said there are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. Well, actually, I'm challenging the second one. I always want to remain compliant with strong governance, but if you understand and play by the rules, there is a lot of opportunity to challenge the traditional mindset of taxation. So with a SSAS, you are running a business. That's very clear. Okay, it's often referred to as a director's pension. To have a SSAS, you need to be operating a sponsored company, a trading company, and you are operating a legal entity, you know, a trust. So there's many things to consider there, but you shouldn't be afraid. There's nothing here that hasn't been done before. And with my book and with great solid advice from your IFAs and your scheme administrators, you too can enjoy the opportunities of a SSAS and how they can impact your property business. So I always put this slide in, is a SSAS for everybody? Well, quite clearly nothing is evergreen for everybody. You need to be able to take control of your economy, be highly accountable. When your funds are transferred into your SSAS, if it's then waiting for 6 months before you do anything, the funds will be just sat there languishing in the bank. Okay, so you need to understand it's a high performance culture, there are penalties, and you are dealing with a pension, so there's a strong duty of care there. So a bit about me, I guess 2 words that encompass me and my background of 26 years in corporate life and 4 or 5 years since, is resilient and relentless. I retired from 7 companies, the board of 7 companies in 2015, and I'd had 26 years of corporate life running global infrastructure companies across 4 countries, 4 continents actually, and 33 countries. I'd be design, build, finance and operating data centers, power stations. Top right, you can see I've worked on the Mississippi, Lock and Dam 16 and Muscatine, Iowa on the Mississippi, and lots of high value data centers, pan-European networks, Asia-Pacific networks. I've worked all the way around the world. But that came at a cost to me. It took me away from my family, who I was doing a lot of what I loved for. And as I mentioned before, I have 4 children. So I retired from corporate life at the age of 45 and decided to create a multi-generational group of companies, of which SSAS Alliance and Equa are just 2 of those organisations. And with our development company, we operate a number of different developments. We've got in excess of 200 apartments. GDV of our developments range anywhere from 2 million to 20 million. And there's a few examples there of the developments that we have completed or have underway. So for me, it was very much repurposing. I'm an engineer at heart, so I was repurposing my engineering skills I very quickly moved from engineering into company management and directorship in corporate life, but I've never lost roots with the value that the engineering skill set can have in creating value out there. And so turning that corporate life into an entrepreneurial mindset in our group of companies has been tremendously fulfilling. So our SSAS journey, we appointed our scheme administrator in January 16, just after I retired from corporate life. So bearing in mind I was 45, so that's 10 years before I could take advantage of a 25% tax-free sum. We started the application process, got HMRC approval, took 7 months at that time, and then the funds took another couple of months onwards to transfer. I'm pleased to tell you it's a whole lot quicker now, and we're now seeing HMRC approvals within a matter of 2, 3, 4 weeks in some cases, and transfer values being transferred from pension companies shortly thereafter. In 2016-17, we acquired a Grade 2 listed 9,000 square foot 5-storey office building, and we got planning permission to convert into 18 residential units. Now, you're probably going to ask a question here on residential units. I'm going to cover that in some detail a little bit later on, because a SSAS cannot own or ever own residential units. So there's ways you can work alongside the rules, but don't step over the rules. You'll get a penalty tax charge. Now, we changed our scheme administrator. It's something called a SSAS takeover, and I cover that process in my book. We decided that we needed a different scheme administrator, somebody maybe a little bit more agile and tactile for our particular strategy. So we moved in Feb 18, and I'm going to do a case study on Portal Precinct, but this was a property in Colchester where we acquired 5 commercial property and 3 residential property within our SSAS, and also the residential property outside of our SSAS. And you can see at the point around about 2016-17, we created SSAS Alliance, and I also wrote my book, SSAS Pensions, towards the end of 2018, early 2019. So all of us have a strategy, and that can include and should include your pensions, property, any IP, stocks, shares, businesses, cash, commodities, income, and that's taking control of your personal economy. And for me, when I left corporate life in 2015, that was my edict, my mandate to me. And I said to my wife, I want to be in control of every facet of our personal economy, and that includes my pension. And to be honest, I couldn't work out how to, I didn't know how to take control of my pensions at the age of 45. Apart from managing the deployment, but I worked out through SIPs and SSAS. So that's how I came across my personal strategy. Now, a great quote here from Barack Obama: "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones who've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek." But I've always had that view in life that nobody's coming to save me. I don't think anybody's coming to save any of us. There's no entitlement culture, and Barack Obama absolutely nails it right on the head there. Okay, we are the ones who are going to save ourselves. We've got to take ourselves out of that comfort zone, challenge tradition, educate ourselves, and really drive forward. And that's how I've always lived my life, in running many millions of pounds of infrastructure. I've run developments from 10 million through to 1.5 billion US dollars, which was a whole Asia Pacific Rim data center rollout with fiber optic networks and trans-Pacific fiber connects. So absolutely huge project, lots of counterparties. So I'm very familiar with business. So let's come back to SSAS, and what can a SSAS own? Well, it can own commercial property, and that comes in a number of flavours: industrial property, retail, agricultural, commercial land, in fact, land, full stop, offices, shops, forestry, woodland, pubs, nursing homes, care homes, and there's a lot of those around, hotels, B&Bs. I've put "and SA ? Service accommodation." This is one of the more frequent questions we get asked in SSAS Alliance. Can a SSAS own service accommodation? Well, the answer is it depends. you can own hotels, bed and breakfast, absolutely. But could you own a 3-bedroom semi-detached house in suburbia that you're using as service accommodation? Absolutely not. No, so you need to be compliant, and that would result in a HMRC penalty tax charge. So it's something that's bandied around a lot, and just be careful on the details. Great example there. You can also own other commercial property, marine berths, and for anybody who wants to own a prison, you can also own one of those. There are things a SSAS can't own. Exotic assets, however you want to define exotic assets, but vintage cars, wine, stamps, antique furniture, and those for a real passion on oriental rugs. I'm sorry, you can't own one of those in a SSAS. You can't own a residential property in a SSAS, but you can impact residential property with a SSAS, and we'll talk about how we'll do that a little bit later on. Okay, you can do personal loans connected with you can't do personal loans connected with a SSAS trustee. You simply cannot do that. You can't do unsecured loans to a sponsoring employer. It has to be secured loans. And also things like carbon credits, storage pods, gold Krugerrands. You can't own gold Krugerrands, but you can own gold bullion. And you can't do loans to member trustees. And there's a number of others. Again, I cover those in detail in the book. So the CALIBRE model. Okay, so what can you own with the CALIBRE model? Well, the things you can do with it, you can collaborate, you can acquire property, you can acquire assets, you can loan your funds. You are your fund manager. And that's an incredible, powerful, accountable model there. It's empowerment at its highest, okay? So you are the fund manager. You can decide what to loan, where to invest, how you can borrow funds, because you wear 2 hats, bear in mind. You've got your own operating company and you've got your SSAS. Your own sponsoring company on certain terms, and I'll cover those in a bit, it's called a loan back. You can borrow from your SSAS, so you can be the bank, some people would term it. And as I mentioned before, it resonates, a SSAS resonates. My children have no interest in a pension statement that comes once a year, but they're really passionate about the property that we own. I can put the kids in the car and I can drive them round in times when we're not in lockdown, obviously. We can drive past the actual property we own as a family unit in our SSAS. And that's phenomenal. That inspiration is enough to educate. So not only are the children shareholders, but they're also trustees. And all the time, whether we're adults or children, we're always trying to challenge ourselves, challenge the norm, challenge tradition, and understand exactly where the boundaries are and how we can best invest and ultimately grow financially and grow in ourselves. So the genesis of SSAS Alliance, it started, to be honest, with how do I secure my own SSAS and optimize my own SSAS. That's how it started. And then I've done so much due diligence and research as an engineer. I'm pretty passionate about doing that level of due diligence, that I thought, well, why don't I inspire others and share that? If I'm looking for that level of due diligence, I'm sure others will be as well. I found it very hard to find information on SSAS going back 4 or 5 years. But now, of course, with my book and some of the other articles we're doing, and with SSAS Alliance, it's a lot more readily available. And our ambition for SSAS Alliance is it will become, and indeed already is, the centre of excellence. It is the continuing professional development site for SSAS trustees in the UK, bar none. It's also got limitless funding introduction. So whether you've got a SSAS or not, if you're a developer and you want to raise funding, you need to be in contact with us at SSAS Alliance in that regard. You need to understand the rules. You need to walk a mile in the trustee's shoes. And it's not just about putting something on social media. That's for the naive and the uncertain. So we can help and support you to become SSAS fundable and ready. And ultimately, I want all of our organisations, SSAS Alliance or EQUA, to become that multi-generational force for good. I've worked a lot with creating shared value over the years, and I understand that creating shared value, there's no longer a place in society of creating profit at the expense of others. It needs to drive value. So talking about driving value, you can go to sasalliance.org is the website. We're on Facebook, the SSAS Alliance Facebook group, and LinkedIn, and of course I've mentioned the book. So within SSAS Alliance, we've got about 3,500 members at the moment, heading rapidly to 50,000, helping them to invest funds, understanding the investment opportunity and the bank grade due diligence required, the economic growth that we can all achieve, and the personal growth that comes with that, as well as being impactful for future generations, creating that education, the connection, and ultimately the opportunity for us all. So what type of property can a SSAS own? Well, here's an typical industrial shed. Yep, a SSAS could absolutely own that. What about this building here? Now, this is one of ours. I know this property very well. This is Oak House in Colchester. Now, it depends when this picture was taken. This was an office building, about 8,500 square foot office building. A SSAS can own that. We converted it into 16 apartments. It was about a 2.8 million GDV development a few years ago. So it could own that as a commercial property, but it couldn't own the freehold or leaseholds of the residential now. This is one we do own in our SSAS. This is part of a block of 5 commercial properties. We've got a tea shop here, and we've got a stitching centre here. Yes, a SSAS can own that, and indeed, yes, a SSAS does own that. A plot of land happens to be a car park. Could a SSAS own that? Yes, a SSAS can own land, no problem at all. Depending on what this gets planning permission for, it may always stay as an operating car park. It can do that, create income. If it got planning for a industrial unit, it can continue to own that, no problem. If it was to create some new houses or blocks of residential apartments, then it would have to shed that asset prior to completion, and I'll talk about that shortly. This is an old wine bar, a pub. Yeah, it can absolutely own that. This is one that we own in our development company. We've developed this into 12 apartments and left the downstairs as 2 commercial units. Here's an interesting one, shops with tops, shop with uppers. Yes, a SSAS can own that, but we've just got to be careful what those uppers are. If those uppers are residential and are apartments, then the answer is no. We'd need to look at how we would structure the ownership of that with the SSAS and outside of the SSAS. If they are office or stock rooms, then no problem, we can own that in our SSAS. Well, there's a McDonald's restaurant, but you take my point, it could be a new build of something. The SSAS could own the land. The SSAS could own that commercial property, no problem. I think McDonald's prefer to own them themselves. But it could own the land, and it could have a 20, 30, 40-year lease to an organisation like McDonald's to build on that land. So again, very, very flexible. There's a 3 or 4 bedroom house in suburbia. Can a SSAS own that? And the answer is a firm no. If that has got planning permission for serviced accommodation, I get this question a lot. Look, Mark, we're paying business rates for serviced accommodation. It's got planning. Look, I think you're on really dodgy ground, to be honest. If it looks like a residential and it's operated as, just got to be very, very careful there. So my answer would be start with a no, because that's where HMRC will start with. And HMRC don't have to prove themselves to you. You prove yourself to HMRC, and you do not want a 55% penalty tax charge. So if it's a hotel or a B&B, absolutely fine. But if you're running it as service accommodation and it looks like that, and it clearly is residential, then the chances are the answer is no. Okay, so forcing appreciation, I can only pack so much in into this slide deck, but forcing appreciation, this is just to acknowledge that you can acquire, let's say, a fish and chip shop on the corner in your SSAS, no problem at all, and you could terminate the lease, or the lease expires, and then you can rebase the leases or bring in a new full repair and insure lease. I'll put Costa here, but an organisation with a stronger covenant strength, and you can get a lot greater yield compression with that type of lease structure, and that will certainly help the fundability as well. So depending on what your strategy is, there's lots of things you can do with commercial property. You can do long-term hold, you can do future development potential and add value that way. You can buy your own business premises. I know a number of organisations, one has owned an engineering company and they now own the premises. You can create enablement but never own. You can do sale and lease backs, land developments, planning gains, rebase leases, and in specie transfers. So you can transfer assets without liquidating them to cash first and transfer them straight into your SSAS. You can also do that with shares actually as well. So very tactile, very flexible, as long as you've got the right advice. So our underlying motto in any of our businesses is being well advised. So a loan back. Now, a loan back is where a SSAS can loan funds to its sponsoring company. You can do up to 50% of the SSAS fund valuation through this method, and you can decide the rate of commercial terms of that loan. It must be a minimum of 1% over bank base rate in broad terms. So it depends where you want the value. If you wanted to loan £100,000 out, from your SSAS to your sponsoring company, you're going to need security, but you could have that as a very low cost of borrowing at 1 or 2% above base, or you could decide you want the value elsewhere, and you could have the value in the SSAS and loan it out at 1% a month, let's say. So you can decide where you want the value. It's very flexible indeed. On a loan back, the terms are not interest only, they're not rolled up, it's a 5-year annual capital repayment. So if you loan to your sponsoring company £100,000, you'll be paying back £20,000 capital each year, plus the interest accrued within that year. So you don't have £100,000 to use for 5 years, you know, it dropped down to 80, 60, less the interest as well. And the funds do go to the sponsoring company. Now, the loan back does require a first legal charge. That makes it a little interesting for some people and not readily achievable as people might initially imagine, but certainly it's still a very, very powerful strategy. But I said a first legal charge. What you probably heard or thought you heard was a first charge on a property. So let's just have a look on a loan back security. Well, indeed, it could be a first legal charge at land registry on a property, an unencumbered property, first charge. The property doesn't have to be owned by you. It could be a family member, a friend, you know, it could be anybody's property should they wish to provide their property as security. It could be a debenture on a company, as long as that company under audit was solid and had underlying assets worth of security. It could be a secure asset that is auditable. It needs a security trustee in place, particularly if it's a residential property, because under default you can't have the asset coming back to haunt the SSAS. So if the residential property, if the loan defaulted, the SSAS recovered the loan through the asset, through the security charge, would end up owning a property. So just got to be careful there that the SSAS can never own the residential property. And it could be a share portfolio or any other audited cash flowing assets. They're not easy to do. but generally it is a first charge on a property that most people seek. And you know what? You can also get leverage in your SSAS. So you can go to the bank, you can go to outside the bank, you go to other SSAS providers, other SSAS trustees, you go to private capital. So if your SSAS fund is worth £1 million, let's say, you can loan up to £50,000 into your SSAS. You can borrow from the bank, you know, a commercial mortgage. So if you had a property worth 400,000, well, you could buy that in cash. But you could, if somebody would ever give it to you, but you could buy that with 100% borrowing. Equally, you could borrow that 75% loan to value, let's say, so you could loan 300,000, and you'd still have 200,000 of potential leverage left. If you add any value, then that would increase the SSAS valuation. Therefore, your leverage value would go up as well. And we cover this in a lot more detail in our SSAS commercial property investing course and within SSAS Alliance. So if you really want to understand this, there's lots of tools and resources and support available for you. Now, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. I would credit this to somebody, but I think about 50,000 people seem to have been accredited for this. This was a bit of advice given to me by one of my first managing directors back in 92, 93. And it's helped me with many complex negotiations on contracts worth hundreds of millions over the years across many countries. Quite often, if you can understand what angle somebody else is coming from, you can normally find the common ground rather than parking your tanks on the lawn and trying to go toe-to-toe with somebody. So walk a mile in someone else's shoes. It's a fundamental pillar in creating shared value. And we use this method because it's in our DNA, to be honest, looking at investor returns. And we call this the ROI to the power of 5, the return on investment to the power of 5. Now, every private investor I know, and I've raised about £22 million of private capital in the last 3.5 years. That's what I do. I raise private capital, I do investor fundraising, and I also mentor people to help them approach this in the right manner. But first thing that an investor, in my humble experience, wants to see is, firstly, they want to see the return of their investment. Then they want to see the return on their investment, on my investment. Then the return on intellect, and I speak with Kevin quite a lot on this, on how we structure things. That return on intellect, everybody wants an economic return, but a lot of investors want something else, want an engaging experience, they want to learn, they might want to become a developer. And this is where we work with our Earn and Learn program as well, where parties may want to become a developer in a year, 2 years' time, but they want to create those skills in the meantime to be able to get to the next level. Creating a return on impact, I'll talk about this in a bit, but this is about creating that support and creating shared value to other needy parties, as well as economic return. And that to us is phenomenally rewarding. And then the return on interaction. How can you bring people together and see them spark off each other and gain a huge amount of knowledge, create relationships, and that's a wonderful thing to see. We do that as a networking hub to be able to support SSAS trustees. So again, the SSAS Alliance is a place to be if you want to join over 3,000 SSAS trustees. And our SSAS Alliance survey recently showed each SSAS trustee has got an average of around about £360,000 of fund under management. So overall, if that average held true across the entire 3,000 plus, we'd be talking about in excess of £1 billion pounds sterling of funds under self-management by our trustees. If you're interested in keeping in contact, I do a SSAS business podcast. The latest version is my business partner. It comes out every Thursday morning. Many of you will know Nigel Green. He's one of the preeminent due diligence experts in commercial property, and he runs our land and acquisition team. Magnificent guy, got a huge portfolio, huge wealth of experience, over 30 odd years in industry. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have been on boards with Nigel consistently for the last 20 years, and we're great personal friends. And he's also a fellow SAS trustee. Both of our wives and Nigel and myself, we are the 4 SAS trustees of our SAS. So I mentioned the SAS Collaboration before. It's great to be able to bring parties together. And we have a SAS Investor Club. You can't buy your way into this. This is exclusive and unique. It's for our investors, and it's also for our SAS Alliance mentorship members as well, people we mentor. So it's earn and learn. There are quarterly meetings, and it's fantastic to have an elite group of SAS investors who understand site visits. We get to explain to them the real nitty-gritty of what it takes, so that they can understand whether investing in commercial property as SAS trustees is right for them. It curates that due diligence at a level that really adds value and security to their trust. Love this quote from General George Patton. If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. Now, what we have within SAS Alliance, we've got over 3,000 members, and those members don't come from property. Those members come from the world of business and life. And you imagine that smorgasbord of experience, intellect, business background, business acumen. It's a real melting pot of a huge amount of knowledge. And I'm continually inspired by the amount of knowledge there and acumen. And I just love that environment. We're all challenging to be different. And at the end of the day, you know, a SAS trustee is somebody very different. They've decided to take control of their personal economy and their pension. So I think that quote from George Patton is very apt. But what we don't want in SAS is no sound bites, okay? Don't want to hear sound bites. I see plenty of them. Okay, there's no substitute for bank grade due diligence. I hear people say about SA or about tax, or you can do this or that. Okay, go to the substance, the real nitty-gritty substance. You're only competing with what you're capable of. Please don't define your strategy by somebody else's sound bites. Okay, there's a very clear methodology there for you to follow. And we've done a SAS Alliance survey. We do a lot of groundbreaking research. And in that survey, in operating your SAS, these are generally the areas that we found most people, SAS trustees, want to invest in, whether directly into somebody else's or into their own. And these are the proportions. Now, what I found particularly interesting was that 76%, one of the highest levels, and 78% in commercial property and commercial to residential. That's where the strongest interest was. And incidentally, that is where you can actually create fund leverage, where you can actually bring bank debt to bear and create that all-powerful leverage within your SAS. So, SAS and residential property. Let's hit this one because many people say, yeah, you can, you know, you just got to be careful. Look, the reality is you cannot have residential property in your SAS ever, and you can never run the risk of it ever being in your SAS. And we've covered this once already earlier on in the presentation, where as a SAS trustee, you can take residential property as security. You've just got to make sure that if that loan does default, that in taking the security provision, that doesn't lead you to owning that residential property. Okay, so you'll need to put security trustee in place to ensure they liquidate the asset on behalf of the lender. So here's a very high level development. Okay, so we're going to secure the development, then we're going to fund and acquire it, we're going to design it, we're going to construct apartments, albeit we may not use a bulldozer, and then we're going to sell the apartments. Just a typical development. I do a lot of commercial land developments, commercial to residential conversions, so it covers a broad spectrum. So this is where a SAS could possibly get involved, okay? So a SAS can enable, but it does not ever acquire the property. Okay, so a SAS has a bank account, okay, and therefore you could use your SAS as proof of funds. you could actually engage in an option or a conditional contract with a SSAS, subject to you getting planning, and put assignability in that option agreement or in that conditional exchange, so that your SSAS goes in at the front end, uses its resources, but then uses the assignability clause, and you can assign that to somebody else, or maybe to your own SPV. So that's a way you could do it. You could acquire a commercial property. You could get a planning gain. I'm not particularly keen on the term, but you take my point. You could turn a commercial and get planning into residential. Well, just because you've got planning doesn't change the use class. Planning is a choice. It lapses after 3 years, so it's still commercial. The SSAS could then sell that to your own SPV, and then you can fund that in a normal way. And finally, you can acquire a commercial property. You could then start the construction within your SSAS, but your SSAS cannot hold that property once that property reaches its certificate of habitation. So by the time it's all plumbed in and got all its certificates and approvals, so it would have to dispose of the asset while it's partially constructed, and therein lies the challenge for you. So there are ways that you can do it. You just got to be careful, and I teach people quite extensively the pitfalls of each and every one of those, but also the opportunity for those who are eyes wide open that can achieve that. Okay, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And we see change through earn and learn and collaborate, people wanting to understand how they can link with other people. What have they got that other people might need? And it's incredibly important to understand that connection. So earn and learn is applicable to SSAS. Thinking differently, creating shared value. I would like you all to leave this presentation remembering this slide. It's indentured in all of our businesses. Creating shared value. We're always leaving something on the table for somebody else. It's how businesses become sustainable, and how we put our head on the pillow each night and sleep easy, knowing that we're creating huge amounts of value. And it's also an ethos which helps us find huge amounts of commercial property. I mean, huge amounts. So if you want to understand more, then drop me a line. So the overview potential, I'll skip through this because we are relatively short on time, but this is a property we own in our SSAS. This presentation is in the SSAS pension book. We've got 5 commercial properties and 3 residential properties. We converted the uppers into residential, and through a series of sales and leasebacks, we then sold the uppers and the freehold into a development company. The commercial went back into the SSAS, and we ended up with, through a series of leases, the final leaseholder, long leases, 999-year leases of the 3 residential units in our property company, very easily able to gain commercial leverage. So the final structure, 5 commercial units in our SSAS, 3 freeholds in our development company, which stays open, and 3 residential 999-year leases in our PropCo. And again, Nigel's due diligence analyzer with equity waterfalls and embedded cash flow modelling can simulate private investor capital. It's a hugely complex tool, but very user-friendly. So we use that extensively to create properties. And here's the aerial view of Portal Precinct. That is, you're looking at part of our pension assets, which we find very, very exciting. So too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. Again, no sound bites. I'm not interested in tittle-tattle discussions. It's got to be meaningful and detailed, resilient and bulletproof, audit-proof, and that will keep you out of harm's way. We're adding value by buying well, conditionality, commercial conversions, and doing the conversion process. And you can see the value in our SSAS and in the PropCo, about 400,000 of equity and huge amounts of cash flow, which is creating that multi-generational legacy. We want to do in our SSAS just one of those every year. And imagine that compounding growth there. We'll be at the lifetime allowance limit very quickly, and then we'll be bringing children in as additional SSAS trustees once they become 18 and can become trustees. But the golden rule of Warren Buffett, never lose money, and rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. Well, I met Warren Buffett back in the 90s, and he was worth 1.4 billion. I had a private lunch with him, actually, just him, myself, and one other person. Now, I wish I'd retained a whole lot more, but you can see since he had dinner with me, he's done. Obviously the impact my presence had on him has been quite phenomenal. I wish. So incredibly engaging guy, and something to really remember. So here's a planning game. So we acquired a 9,000 square foot commercial property. We bought it in the SSAS. We got planning in the SSAS. We sold it to our development company and duly developed it. But in the process, our operating company got a fee, because a SSAS has no resources apart from cash and assets. It has no people. So we operated as the operating company on behalf of it. So again, you can create liquidity and income by working in unison with a SSAS. And we love giving back, creating that impact through the books, through mentorship, through working with Cornerstone Place, which we're investors in. And we raise funds for B1G1, the British Heart Foundation, and the NHS. So Harry Truman said it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And when we're helping homelessness, it's quite phenomenal. So look, if you want to hear more from me, please go onto Amazon, Audible, or Kindle on the books, and hopefully one of you are going to win a copy of each one of those signed copies. So I'm going to leave you with this: an impactful SSAS. Pension contributions, it took me 26 years to raise £400,000 of pension contributions, and we doubled that in 12 months with Portal Precinct. So if you want to understand more about due diligence, just take a screenshot of that. If you go onto that link, you can download 10 things you must do to avoid costly mistakes with any property deal, SSAS or otherwise, and that will help you connect with us. My business partner Nigel Green and myself put that together recently. And so from me, a massive thank you to Joshua, Alice, and the huge team that must be behind, as well as all the speakers. Thank you for watching. There's the link for the Virgin Giving page, and there's my contact details. You can contact me personally or through EQUA Academy or SSAS Alliance. And Joshua, I know I've overrun slightly, but just put as much as I could in there to really honour the NHS and honour the platform that you've given us.
No, absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much for taking the time. That really was, as much as you could do in an hour, you've done that and more in terms of the amount of content in there, and just actionable steps of what people they can now do, and they can look to kind of see whether a SSAS is something they should be looking at. So what we'll do is, for anyone who hasn't donated yet, to get their hands on a copy of those books, donate now. Make sure you put your name in there, because in a couple of minutes' time we'll be doing the draw, picking a number, and seeing who will get their hands on a book. What we'll do now is just run through a couple of the questions. So one we've got. So basically, can you set up a SSAS in the early stages of a business, or does it need to be a mature company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The rules at HMRC have really tightened up over the last few years. Quite often there needs to be 1 year's trading accounts, or at the very least a payroll function in those companies. So speak to a scheme administrator, and always talk to 3 scheme administrators. But there is some clear guidance on how to do that. So it doesn't have to be a 5-10-year-old company, but the company does need to have a payroll, does need to evidence that it's trading, and not just set up last week and then transfer your pensions into it. And you can see it's trying to avoid pension liberation.
Perfect. So I know, yeah, you just mentioned the word trading. So does it have to be a trading company, or can it be a form of investment company?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not an expert in that area, but you need to make sure it is a trading company. Okay, there are lots of different forms of companies, and a lot of that is your background, Joshua. So a trading company. Quite often we find people might want to set up a SSAS, and they've got one company, and they've got one buy-to-let that they're just holding in there. So look, do your research, speak to your scheme administrator, your corporate SSAS administrator, and really understand the detail before you press go.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely agree with that one. So can you have a SSAS whilst living abroad? So they tend to retire in the UK, but can they have one whilst they're living overseas?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Perfect. That definitely answers that one. And then from your experience, what's the minimum kind of investment or lump sum needed just to kind of really get a SSAS going?
Okay, so there is a cost associated with SSAS. It's generally a cost for the SSAS, and that's divisible across anywhere between 1 and 11 SSAS trustees. So you need to make sure it's equitable. Now, I'm not going to fall into the trap that a lot of people say. I think the traditional answer people would give it would be somewhere between 60, 70, 80,000 pounds would be about the minimum. If I gave you a scenario of somebody setting up a SSAS with zero, they haven't got any pensions, setting up a SSAS for zero, because they're setting that SSAS up because they're a property developer and they're just about to make £200,000 or £300,000 on a development. Then they can use maybe general unallocated fund transfer. They can, there might be 2 or 3, it might be husband and wife, let's say, and they could put in their £40,000 each a year, tax-free allowance. So this is about tax planning. This is about your whole structure. So there isn't a simple answer to that. There's lots to think about, and please just let everybody know not to get carried away with a simple answer of, it needs to be 70 or 80,000. But for most, it's about the accountability that comes with a SSAS.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic answer on that one. I think we just about got time for one more question. What one shall we have? So we've got one here. So if someone were to take an option on some land via the SSAS, can they use the funds within the SSAS to pay for a planning consultant, architect, and the necessary fees to obtain planning?
100%. Yep. You'd put that through your scheme administrator. With our professional team, whether it be our accountant, our solicitors, we're always very open. I would encourage you, for any advice and counsel, including your scheme administrator, always be transparent. What are you trying to achieve? And show them that strategy. But yes, absolutely, you can. You do need to be careful that your SSAS doesn't become a trading vehicle, and you're buying something and selling, buying, selling, buying, selling. That will get you into trouble. But absolutely, the answer is yes, you can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so what we'll do is we've got 2 minutes left now. So what we'll do is run through the people that have donated during the talk to get their hands on a copy of one of those books. So there are 24 people in total. So what we'll do is we'll do a book at a time. So for the first book, what's the first book that we'll be able to give away?
Shall we say the SSAS one?
Yep. So for a copy of the SSAS book, can you pick a number between 1 and 24?
20.
20. That is, where was 20? That is Angela Soong. So Angela, hopefully you're still watching this now. Send me an email on joshua@jsmpartners.co.uk, and I'll pass your details and address on to Mark, who will get you a signed copy of the book out. Well done. Perfect. I'll make a note of that. Yeah, and for the second book.
Second one will be commercial to residential conversions, and number 1.
Number 1. So that's Beta Stepinski. So again, yeah, if you email me your address, so joshua@jsmpartners.co.uk, we will get that over to you.
And
then
then
last but not least,
advice to your younger self, we'll go for number 10.
Number 10. That is Sarah Suzuba. I hope I pronounced that right. If you send me your address as well, and I'll forward that on to Mark, and we'll get those books out for you guys. Well done.
No problem.
Perfect.
I'll make sure I put a private message and sign those for them as well.
That's really appreciated. Thank you very much for your time, Mark. It's been a great presentation. Everyone's bound to have learned a lot on that. And for those, please do follow Mark. You know, he gives away a lot of content. He's definitely somebody who knows his stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. Doing God's own work there. All the best.
Likewise. Cheers.